Kyle Israel, welcome to Sports Management Podcast.
Marcus, thank you for having me. I think I'm typically on your side of the world, but fortunately, I'm here in Florida with some better weather than people are seeing kind of globally.
Definitely, it's really, really cold in Sweden where I'm at. And I know you said that it's kind of cold where you are as well, but at least you got the sun.
We do have the sun, but thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
The pleasure is all mine. So, you are the co-founder of Momentous Sports. So, can you tell us a little bit about your role and the company?
Yeah, absolutely. So Momentous Sports, there was a bit of a journey to get to a place where we decided to launch the platform, and I'll kind of roll back here. But Magnolia Hill Partners, the logo you see behind me is our family office. And over the last 3 years, as we typically are investing fairly agnostically, we started to lean into a few core verticals of focus, really with the intention of building subsidiaries or platforms to pursue the theses that we were looking to activate. And so Momentous for us was our platform that we launched in sports generally. You can think of us as a sports organization. We do have a $100 million fund currently that we're out on market raising, but we'll pursue opportunities in sports properties, emerging leagues, tech on the edge of sports eventually via SPV whenever that makes sense and when it's outside of the fund mandate. But our core focus is really at the intersection of sports and real estate. So investing into these really unique teams and properties, typically outside the big five leagues here in the US and outside of the championship and Premier League over in Europe or the UK. And the reason for that is we started to identify over the last 36 months as we were looking at deals and kind of, deciding, what our strategy was going to be was that in the middle market of sports, so teams from 1 to $120 million valuations, there was a significant focus on infrastructure development. So stadium renovation in Europe typically, or stadium development here in the US. And then ultimately mixed use real estate development around that. And so as we kind of processed our strategy, we wanted to lean into where our expertise was, where it is. We're not passive investors. We're typically active in nearly everything that we do. And so we started to identify that we could lean into our commercial real estate experience, both on the capital formation side, master development planning side, and pair that extremely well with sports generally, but in a way where we could invest in these properties and in these teams and be a meaningful minority partner, and then help create a synergy between team ownership, real estate developer, and ensuring that these projects actually came to fruition. And so, we made an investment into Sporting JAX in Jacksonville, Florida, about 2 years ago. That was our first investment that's now in our fund portfolio. But that became the proxy for us as it relates to the type of opportunities we as a firm wanted to pursue. And so that deal itself, and I'll pause after this, is a men's USL championship team that will start playing this spring. We have a women's Gamebridge Super League club that is in first place right now, top of the table. They're in the second half of their first season. We have a 12,000 athlete academy. And then we're going to develop a 15,000 seat stadium on a large plot of real estate, let's call it 60 to 80 acres in Jacksonville. And that became the deal where we realized, yes, we can participate on the team side. We can participate in the co-GP positioning on the real estate. And so Momentous is a vehicle built to continue to execute against that thesis, but to also widen the scope of how we participate in sports in the future.
Really interesting. And you mentioned that you're staying out of the big five and the biggest leagues. Is that because of the price tag, or is there any other reasons?
Yeah, I mean, the valuations, in the multi-billions at this point in time, we saw that you could go in, whether through another fund or directly into kind of very, very small minority positions, especially with the amount of capital we're looking to allocate. And that's fantastic. And there are people doing that. Maybe it's treated more like an annuity a little bit to get up in a deal like that. But for us, we knew from a from an activation perspective, from a value add perspective, that we could, or we believe that we could have more meaningful return opportunities in that middle market layer, in particular, because there's so much desire in these secondary cities across the US and Europe to have, sports anchored mixed use developments, live, work, and play style. And so that's really the reason that we focused on that category. In addition to that, we couldn't find anybody else from a fund perspective or a platform perspective that was pursuing that layer thematically, meaning any investment they're making is purely in that middle market. In both of those positionings, team and real estate, we just couldn't find somebody that was doing it thematically. So we decided to build a platform to do just that. And when there's a unique opportunity like a Major League Baseball deal or an NHL deal, where it's a much larger check, we do have the capacity and ability to, spin up some type of vehicle to go and pursue those opportunities via SPV. But we're very selective, obviously, about those, and we're really focused on the core mandate of the middle market of sports, team, and real estate.
Can you just explain SPV shortly if there is someone who doesn't know what that is?
Yeah, it's an acronym for special purpose vehicle. So think of, a deal specific LLC or business that allows, a co-GP like us to come in and manage an investment, and bring in LP capital, to round out the total investment that we're making into a club. So if a fund has multiple assets underneath it as a part of the portfolio over time, an SPV is very acutely focused on one specific deal, and that's the only thing that SPV or vehicle participates in. If hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, for sure. Are you
Cool.
looking into women's sports in particular? Because I was speaking to John Reynal, who is very into women's football or soccer, and that the club's IP value have risen from $1 million, which was Angel City FC 5 years ago, and now they are worth 150 million, the sports IPs. So it's a huge potential there and an up and coming market for sure. So are you looking into that specifically?
Yeah, first of all, that was a very good interview. I saw that. So well done there. And yes, we are. In Sporting JAX, we have a women's team right now that's playing. We're watching women's football, women's soccer, both domestically and Europe. To your point, yes, climb rapidly from a valuation perspective. I think even Angel City, when Bob Iger came in, it was at a $250 million valuation. And to your point, only 5 years prior, it was nowhere close to that. I think another signal from the market as it relates to the NWSL here in the US is, the recent franchise acquisition in Atlanta, where Arthur Blank and their group acquired the franchise rights only for $160 million. Where 5 years ago, that was nowhere remotely close to that price point. So, yes, it is very much trending. It is something that we're watching closely. We are looking at opportunities to continue to participate there. We're very excited about the Gamebridge Super League, which is a USL-owned league. It's in its second season. It's still very approachable from a valuation perspective, but will provide unique opportunities in women's soccer, which the US, obviously has a great history of being or producing talent in, to still be a part of that growing soccer infrastructure on the women's side here. And as we open our funnel more towards Europe in the future, obviously there's a ton of focus and there's been success as it relates to, 50,000 people showing up to these women's football matches, where, that's something that we're paying very close attention to. So absolutely, whether it be soccer, whether it be basketball, even volleyball, we're watching the women's side very closely and do agree that it is a trending, and maturing pretty quickly, market within this asset class.
Definitely. And you mentioned also before that, Momentous is blending ownership with real estate. So what's the hardest strategic choice that you have to make in that model?
I think there's there's a couple things. At the end of the day, a key part of my role is the underwriting of the operators of the club that's associated with the real estate project. We are not looking to be control owners in any franchise today. We want to be, like I mentioned, a meaningful minority. So there is an important underwriting of the people that are waking up every day and executing the strategy on the sporting side and the team operation side. There's risk there, in a sense. You've got to get that right, and you've got to back the right team, especially as more people get into the space and start to participate in this asset class. On the real estate side, like these are huge projects, right? 40 to 100 acres, 500 to $1 billion cost type of projects. So when you're selecting an opportunity, really understanding, hey, is the land under control, right? Or is there still a process to acquire the land? There's risk baked into that. What is the local market demographics, right? When you look at how a city or an area in a community is trending, you're typically looking at a lot of the normal underwriting data points, market migration, how many people are in the market, what's the age demographics, what's the foot traffic, what is the driving traffic. We do have real estate experts on our team. I'm not going to pretend to be one at the moment. I'm getting dangerous on that side, but it's the real estate and kind of the fully baked typical real estate view that you look through when deciding, can we develop a multi-unit housing complex here? What does bringing some type of medical into this ecosystem look like? Is it needed? Is it necessary? F&B and entertainment, you're considering the same thing, and then hotels as well. So if you get into an opportunity where there's not a line of sight on land and land's not under control, where that ownership group of the team does not have a great or emerging or budding relationship with the public entities, whether that be the county, the mayor, the city, whomever, it's always great to have that support on your side. There's some qualifications to ensure that you don't get into a deal where you think real estate is just around the corner as a part of the opportunity, when in fact it's much longer than you anticipated, because that impacts IRR, that impacts the hold lifetime of each investment. So there's not really one. You've really got to show up and ensure that the qualification of the opportunities is really buttoned up. And for us, that's very real estate forward, while ensuring that the operational group on the team side, or at least that we have conviction with that operational group that they can execute.
Interesting. And you mentioned Europe as well. You can that you're looking into this market. And here's a little bit different when it comes. It's not as many franchises as in the US, and many clubs have this 51% rule that usually is the case in Sweden, for example, that the fans and the members own 51% of the club. So does that present a difficulty for Europe rather than in the US?
It certainly does. To your point, Sweden, Germany, right, with the 50+1 rule. I think, Bundesliga and the DFL generally is one of the most untapped markets globally as it relates to soccer from an investment perspective. There's just the innate challenges of, you can put your capital there, but you're not going to make many decisions about how it's spent and all the elements that you would want to be a part of. Typically, doesn't mean it can't be done. I know of deals currently right now where they're thinking about ways to work around that. That's one piece, obviously, to your point. The other piece, maybe I should mention, just as we think about Europe, it was a core focus for us the last 3 years. I was looking at deals across every league, every country, every level. And what I identified kind of personally is that I think in 3 to 5 years, from a real estate perspective, that local councils, local cities are really going to start to get behind the idea of live, work, play. There's many housing crises, or a need for housing in many communities across Europe, where this thesis and this strategy can be impactful. If you look at Berlin as an example, on the east side of the city, in East Side Gallery, we have new, a couple of years old Uber Arena. It's built up with a music venue next to it, hospitality, hotels, everything there. And that's been transformational for the city of Berlin. It's probably a reason why they're going to have a chance at having an NBA Europe basketball team. because of the venue, because of the setup there. For us right now, the core focus, at least in 2026, is the domestic US. Reason being, it's where we have the most expertise. It's where we understand the markets the most and understand how to work the public-private relationships. But we're paying very close attention to Europe. It's a market that we do want to be in eventually. But we realized in the short term there were plenty of opportunities here in the domestic US where we had relationships established and where we could create the best structure for the returns that we were looking for. But I do think that sport generally, and then the combination of real estate with sport will be a very heavy trend as we roll into 27, 28, and into 2030 as it relates to Europe. At least that's just from sitting in my seat and what I'm seeing on the ground.
Interesting. Is there some like specific areas in US that you're targeting more than others? Because if you're talking real estate, maybe if we take New York as an example, it's very crowded if you compare to maybe Texas. I'm not an expert in the US market by far, but I mean, there are certain areas that are definitely more crowded, and if you have the real estate piece as well, that might add a piece of complexity.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, our core focus and the way that we articulate it is premium or premier secondary markets throughout the US. So we're not trying to go into, if you think through the lens of soccer, we're not trying to go into the markets where the MLS currently exists. Those are typically bigger media markets. We're looking sub 32, look outside the largest 32 markets that the US has. And that's where we see a few things. Number one, we see a population of people that typically has a minor league baseball team in their community, maybe a minor league hockey team, but typically not as much competition for live sports entertainment being one thing, but a desire to continue to build out those communities with sports franchises. Two, you see public-private relationships really turning on, where these local governments and entities are realizing the value of these live, work, play environments, the experiential opportunity for their citizens, anchored by sport. So those are markets that we're very focused on. But, in simple terms, you think of a Charleston, South Carolina, you think of a Omaha, Nebraska, Jacksonville, although they have an NFL team, they're kind of at the top of those secondary markets. So it's markets like that, really across the country, we're generally willing to look at. I would say that our wheelhouse is in the Southeast and Sun Belt because of some of the relationships and partnerships that we have with developers in those regions. But we're not afraid to, do something in Oregon or Washington if it makes sense ultimately. But yeah, premium secondary markets, not a lot of, big five sport competition. And if we can make it work in the Sun Belt or Southeast region, ideally, but it doesn't need to exclusively be there.
I understand. And you mentioned you reside in Florida, so is there anything around there that is of interest at home? Home
Yes.
field?
So Sporting JAX, it's about 2 hours north of here in Orlando. So that was a part of the reason why we participated in that deal. I'll be able to go to a match, which is not normal for me this week, so I can drive up and see their match on Saturday night. There are a number of other projects here across the state, on the Space Coast where SpaceX and NASA are very much an emerging community when you think of the future of space travel. Inter I don't even know how to say this. Using space travel to go from here to China in 2 hours. I forget what the framing of that is, but we're really looking for, okay, what type of tech trend or general trend is coming up out of these very kind of unique marketplaces where people are moving to because of corporations being there that need entertainment. And so there's a number of those in South Florida, Central Florida, East Coast, West Coast, and in North Florida that we're paying attention to, but we're obviously actively involved in Sporting JAX in Jacksonville at the moment.
Interesting. And I know that the Sporting JAX was your first flagship project that includes WSL and USL teams plus a stadium and mixed-use development. So a lot of things in one there. So what are the biggest lessons and learning that you have taken from this project?
Good question. Um, Number one, building an incredible culture within the sports organization is critical. Ensuring that everybody is on the same page from ownership to management to the staff to the sporting side to the athletes. Having the right culture in place from the very beginning is critical. You know, an expansion team has challenges. Obviously, you're bringing a new brand to a market that is showing up for the first time. So how do you activate, right? Um, how do you get the word out in a meaningful way to the community? For us in Jacksonville in particular, having a soccer academy with 12,000 athletes that are walking around with our badge on, whose parents are wearing our memorabilia as well, or our merch. Like those are all critical kind of early days establishing of the franchise and organization, especially when it's an expansion opportunity. Um, I think those are two key learnings. The real estate component is really, really critical. You know, we've learned that you really want to have land under control when you enter an opportunity. There's a couple sites that we've been looking at in Jacksonville in particular and making decisions on to figure out what's best for us. Um, you know, Ideally that's already baked and under control is a learning for us. Doesn't really change the process, but it is a risk mitigator that you would want to think about and consider. And then, we're playing in with that club currently in a third-party stadium. So we play at Hodges Stadium at the University of North Florida. Obviously, you're doing your best to, but you're not creating the environment that a fan will experience in your brand new home stadium. So really working hard to ensure that in the interim, going into your own stadium, you're creating an environment that is still exciting, enticing, engaging for fans to come out to and really enjoy the product that you're putting on the pitch. So those are all some key learnings. It's a great question. If we had 2 hours, I could probably go quite deeper. Um, but it really comes down to the team owners that are waking up every day and think about executing the project. It's just critical that there's extreme alignment, and fortunately, we have that with Jacksonville. Um, you just can't take for granted just assuming that they're going to operate in a with a standard and with a capacity that you would just expect. It's got to be trust but verify to ensure that. And we're fortunate that that's the case, but we've looked at other deals where over time it became evident that that wasn't, which we stayed clear of. So those are some of the key kind of like just initial things that stick out to me.
Yeah. And looking forward, you said that 2026 you're focusing on the US market, but if you're taking on different goggles and looking 3, 5 years ahead, are there any big plans for Momentous?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, we'd obviously like to have closed our first fund and have the capital deployed. We'll probably do 5 or 6 projects total in this fund. Um, I think that we'll probably have an SPV or two that are going into a really unique asset. Maybe it has sports as a component of, or definitely has sports. Maybe it has real estate as a component of it. Maybe not, just depending on the asset. So seeing a handful of those investments over the next 3 to 5 years will be meaningful for us. And then I think that as time goes on, especially with my seat, being in Berlin and in Europe a majority of the time, and the relationships that I've built there, being active in Europe, in the MENA region, the Middle East, there's a lot of activity there as well, a lot of capital looking to get into sports. Those are markets that we want to participate in when it makes sense for us. We're not going to get out over our skis, but it is very obvious to me that U.S. capital is looking for TAM, total addressable market, beyond the domestic U.S. So some of that's in Latin America, South America, but a lot of meaningful opportunities are there in Europe as well. And I think it's a market that needs to continue to mature from a club operations perspective. A lot of it is still kind of how things were done 20, 30, 40 years ago. And it's pretty obvious that the sophisticated partners, investors, and operators who are thinking about football in 2040 rather than football in 2000, are just in many ways operating better franchises or clubs at the moment. So we're paying very close attention there. I'm watching some case studies, deals that we've looked at, deals that we may have invested in the future, but that we're kind of tracking now over a 2, 3, 4 year cycle to ensure that our strategy, our thesis, would have been effective in those cases, so that when we do start, making more meaningful investments there long term, we've been able to track dummy cases to see how they played out ultimately, and then tweak our strategy and thesis from there.
Mm. A lot of things happening for sure.
Plenty of things happening right now, no doubt about it.
That's great. I like to get to know the guest a little bit more as well. So, how does a boy get interested into sport, become a college quarterback, and then transitions into a sports executive and investor?
A long journey and a long road. So yes, I was very fortunate to play sports, played all sports really growing up. Was fortunate to play quarterback and be the starting quarterback at my university, UCF here in Orlando. Played some professionally overseas across Germany, Poland, and in Moscow, of all places. I guess you could probably call it semi-professionally with American football. But we did get paid, and it was an incredible experience to break out of the bubble. It's been interesting that a lot of the relationships that I built, 15 years ago as an athlete have been meaningful as I've moved back into sports again. But I spent the first decade of my professional career post that in broadcasting, both on the radio and TV side, and also in the hospitality space as a restaurateur. Had a couple of independent projects of my own. I was a master franchisee for fast casual restaurant concepts as they moved into markets. Here in Central Florida, took a restaurant brand from no locations to 15 locations, and really operated that process, from top to bottom. And then I took a very strange right-hand turn because I was mentoring student athletes that were graduating from my university in 2017 and 18. And I saw this kind of cycle of depression. They were being told they were set up perfectly for success. You got a free education. You had this incredible sporting experience. Now go be normal, get a job, and move on. And that's just not the experience for the athlete who's completely losing their identity. They're breaking away from all of their teammates at one time. They don't have this really unique structure anymore to perform within every day. And so I just wanted to do something about it. I thought, for myself personally, there was this transitional challenge, in that phase of my life that brought up depression and just a struggle to articulate this feeling of like, I was this person, but today I'm not anymore. Like, how do I deal with that going forward? And so that sent me down a very long rabbit hole, getting into neuroscience, understanding, neurochemicals, dopamine, neuroadrenaline, cortisol, etc. And I ended up co-founding a startup called Nestry, which is an acronym for neurostrength. Really where our early focus was on supporting contact sport athletes who had retired or weren't playing anymore, and their kind of struggle with what we believe to be symptoms of CTE. Don't ask me to say that acronym. It's very, very long and challenging to say. But ultimately, what you hear about in the NFL from concussions or subconcussive hits. So I founded that startup, co-founded that startup. We brought in some fantastic investors in the sports community, Calvin Johnson, Megatron, among others, and started to grow it. And at that point in time, I met my fiance, who works for the Adidas family, the Adi Dassler grandchildren. Started a family of funds focused on sports and health tech through the premise of if Mr. Dassler was alive today, what would he be doing with Adidas and what would he be investing in? So I met my fiance through that process. We quickly found out that she was pregnant, and so I moved to Berlin, which is how I ended up back overseas. And at the same time, Magnolia Hill Partners, the family office that I'm now with, they were our largest investor in that startup. And they said, Kyle, we have deep institutional finance experience, fund management experience, et cetera. It'd be interesting to pair that with somebody like yourself, who's more of a strategist, operator, very relationship driven, ultimately entrepreneur. Um, you know, Come in and help us start to look at these sports deals that are crossing our desk. We're not sure if we want to participate in this asset class. You can learn a lot of the institutional finance and investment side along the way, but your core focus will be identifying how we show up and participate in sports and if we do it all. So it was a very long sport to hospitality to the neuroscience and startup space that ultimately led me to the family office. And then with the launch of Momentous last September, that was kind of the culmination of 3 years of work of identifying how we wanted to show up and participate in sports. And a lot of saying yes along the way, a lot of getting into rooms where I was definitely not the smartest person in the room, a lot of willingness to work through at times what I would term as imposter syndrome, and a lot of learning, right, in real time as quickly as possible. And so being comfortable with ambiguity, being comfortable with the unknown, but kind of showing up every day, and taking it head on ultimately led me here. But there's no other space or vertical in the world that I'd want to be participating in. That sports are just such an incredible platform for impact and for growth and for change. And if you think about it, what's the one thing that brings every nation together in the world every 4 years, right? It's the Olympics. And so sport have this deep tradition of unifying the globe rather than dividing it, which is a problem in society today, obviously, highlighted heavily here in the US. And so I feel fortunate to be a part of an ecosystem and a part of an asset class where you can not only access incredible, returns from an investment perspective, but have incredible impact on local communities and other human beings in a meaningful way.
I completely agree. And so many great takeaways from what you said there. And one thing that you said, that a lot of saying yes and a lot of not being the smartest guy in the room. And I mean, that's good advice that people usually give, to say yes to opportunities and to surround yourself with smarter people, because then you are, if you spend time with four smart people, you'll be the fifth one and so forth. So I think you did it
Totally agree.
right, obviously.
Totally. I totally agree with that. And I think that comes off the tongue really easily. Like it makes sense when people hear that. It's another thing to, go and do it. And, I would urge anybody that's listening in your audience, like, break out of the bubble, get uncomfortable, get comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's usually where magic starts to happen, is when you put yourself in those types of positions. I thought that was just stuff people said before, but now I'm realizing that, that's what it takes to do unique things in life. And I'm happy that for me, that's within this world of sports.
Hmm. And you said also that you had a tough time transitioning from being an athlete into the business world. And I think that's very common among athletes, that you identify as an athlete. And then when you're not anymore, you're having a little bit of an identity crisis. Was that the experience you had, or what was the difficulty for you transitioning from sports to more of the business side?
It's a great question. Mine was similar to that. Now, I think when you use words or language like identity and identity crisis, like that's the language that we use to describe what we think this experience is. I had something similar. I was trying to figure out what's next for me, right? I've been known as this. Now I'm not, or I'm not that anymore, but people still think I am, and that's the only way they think about me. There's two sides to that coin. That can be advantageous in business and networking and relationships, but it also can be a reminder that you aren't that person anymore constantly, but that seems to be the value people see in you. So that's a weird dynamic a little bit. Um, but if you take it a layer deeper, And what I realized is that me, myself, and these athletes that I was, working with or mentoring, they didn't have the language to articulate that feeling. All they could say was like, I'm having an identity crisis, I think. And so I was really thinking about with my partner, like, how do we give these athletes an understanding of what the experience actually is, and then solutions to help them work with that experience. So what it ultimately is, if you go down this neuroscience rabbit hole with me here for a second, this is Kyle Israel's opinion. I'm not a doctor. I don't uh, pretend to be a doctor, but from what I've learned is if you think about for a second, on an American football team, you have 125 teammates. And on Friday, those are your teammates. And on Monday, you're no longer on that team. Your brain processes that like the ending of a relationship, which is never easy, right? But times 120. So that's one. Like your brain starts to release stress chemicals because you're all of a sudden out of that environment. Number two is in sports generally, but in American football, it's one of the most dopaminergic environments in the world. You're in constant pursuit of something. You're training, you're working out, you're trying to become the starter, or then you're competing, you're practicing. But all year round, there's this pursuit of better, the next thing. Meaning your brain is getting this very, very strong chemical and these dopamine hits all the time. So let's say that all ends on Friday, and on Monday you wake up and you have no teammates, you're not pursuing anything in sport anymore. Um, Ultimately, you're not getting the same amount of dopamine. And dopamine, what is the chemical that gives you the energy to pursue something or get up and drive towards something more. And you're not feeling or sensing that anymore. And it can be this lull. I like this saying, for athletes, typically everybody else's norm, the general population from a neurochemical perspective, is the athlete's basement. So for me to go be normal actually means I need to go down from a neurochemical perspective to what for me is a basement, and all of a sudden I'm not getting those neurochemicals. So that is like another key piece of just understanding, hey, the sport is gone, but what's the next thing I want to pursue? Is that an internship? Is that a job? Is that a relationship? Whatever you're looking towards, um, understanding that when you set a goal and an intention and you go pursue that, your brain starts to, you know, release that dopamine again. And so it's important to have like the what's next there so that you can drive towards that. So the relationships, the structure, the environment, the dopaminergic piece of it, and then in some cases, celebrity or just being out in front of 50,000 people and performing, like those are the moments in your life that you'll have the most adrenaline ever, right? The most dopamine ever. And not having those anymore or a way to show up and compete is tough. So yeah, the transition for me was challenging, not knowing any of that prior or what I was really experiencing. I think moving to Europe helped me because when I woke up every day, everything was new and novel, and I had to figure out where to buy groceries and how to ride on a tram or train somewhere. Like all of those things kind of fill that void of like what's next. Um, but it is something that needs to continue to be talked about more. I think it needs to be framed beyond identity and go like, hey, there's a neurochemical element to this so that people actually know what they're dealing with and can prepare appropriately.
Definitely. I haven't actually thought about it that way, but it makes a lot of sense. And as you said, like it's hard to get these highs that you get in sports in regular life, so to speak. And if,
Yeah,
I understand it's easy to, miss out on those and these feelings and getting those dopamine hits for sure.
no doubt.
And if we stay on that topic a little bit, so you transitioned from athlete into business. Has being an athlete influenced you or helped you as an investor and strategist in the sports industry more from a business setting?
Yeah, I believe that it has. First and foremost, like in the business world I'm in, there's two sides, right? There's fundraising side, and then there's the deal flow side and making investments. And the fundraising side in particular, you know, I don't care who you are or what you've done in the past, raising capital is not easy. And you have to show up with grit, tenacity. You've got to follow through. You've got to wake up with true intention that like I have to continue to pursue raising capital. I think in sports you have to show up every day and perform. Um, you have to continue to strive to be better. And so just the innate built in like I'm waking up today and there's a lot of stuff for me to accomplish. That in sports was obviously really critical. You didn't have a choice. You had to show up and perform, or you didn't have a spot. Um, and in business, it's the same way, right? You've got to show up and perform, or they're going to bring somebody else in to do it that can. So just the tenacity and grit, I think, was critical for the space that I'm in today. We're building business, right? So leadership qualities that you get in sports, in particular as a quarterback, you know, you're the leader of a team generally, but at least 10 guys on the field at the same time as you. So how do you communicate with them? How do you get them motivated? How do you keep them excited and locked in? How do you make it seem like you're all rowing in the same boat together and that you're just an equal as the leader ultimately? I think learning that in sports has allowed me to apply that to any business I've been in. Hospitality, I had to manage 16 to 21-year-olds, right? Making myself equal to them, showing them that I'm an equal, but demanding a certain level of performance. I learned how to communicate that really, really well in that world. In the entrepreneurial world, ambiguity, right? You don't know what's around the corner. You don't know how long the company's going to survive. You have a runway and you're under pressure to perform. That is, you know, a good place for me to be in because there's pressure and demand. And I think sport has helped me understand how to manage pressure, when to push, when to back up. Um, so those are only a few parallels. There are a lot. But it absolutely, you know, from a leadership perspective, from a communication perspective, and from a grit and resilience perspective, those are all things that I lean on, not consciously, but just with how I'm built to this point.
Mm. And the leadership aspect I think is really interesting because I feel that it's kind of different in a sports setting versus in business because in sports, especially in elite sports, everyone is elite. And you know, they are the 1%, they are the high performers, basically everyone on that team. That's maybe not the case always in a business setting. You're having someone who's happy with their job, you know, doing what they're supposed to, and that's it. And then you have the high performer, and then if you're unlucky, you're having an underperformer or a low performer. So your team is different from a sports team in that aspect, I would think.
Yeah, I would say generally yes. Now, there are those in the sports world that can fall into that category, perhaps. Um, but you know, definitely from like general business perspective, you do like I don't think CEOs or managers or operators should get credit because they hired somebody. Maybe I should say it this way. It's more impressive when somebody has brought somebody onto the team when they can take somebody that's struggling, understand what are the levers that I can pull to motivate this individual to get a better, you know, product or performance out of them, but in a way that they genuinely feel that I'm aligned with them and not trying to micromanage them. Like I think that ability to give people a chance, have some empathy, understand what that person is going through, that allows you to kind of show up and work with them through the right lens is critical. And I think that I've learned a lot of that through sport, but it is different. You just assume that everybody's going to wake up with the same fire that you do at times. But that's just not how the world works. It's an advantage and a cost benefit to not just turn around and fire. But if you have the ability to get the best out of that human being and you have strategies and ways to do that, you can, number one, save your company a lot of money. You can continue to move quickly because you don't have to re-onboard in that position. And so for me, I'd rather lean into that individual and bring them up and lift them up and show them that there's hope here rather than going, you're not going to work for me next, and then start the process all over again.
Yeah. No, I like that mentality because it's usually talk like hire fast, fire fast. If they are not the right person, then you know get them out as quick as possible. But it's I like that mindset that you have that you know you see the best in people and you see that you can if someone is struggling, that you can help them and get to the maximum of their capabilities.
It doesn't always work, don't get me wrong. And, it depends on the industry as well, right? When I had employees, I had 260 that were making $9 an hour. Yes, I would spend some time leaning into bad apples, but I also, in those cases, made a clear decision like this just simply doesn't work and we're moving on. But as you go into more of a white collar setting where salaries are much bigger, people are moving places to come work for you. You want to be super mindful of what are everything I can put into place to give this person the best chance of success so that number one, I don't uproot their family, bring them here and let them go. But number two, there's something I likely identified them in the first place that made me want to hire them. And how do I get that version of them to show up? So it takes time, it takes effort, it does take energy. Um, but, depending on the case and the circumstance and the type of industry, I think both can be effective. But my inherent Kyle, how I wake up and see the world with a father that was a minister, is typically those people that aren't performing aren't just lazy most of the time. They just need somebody to believe in them. And I try to figure out ways to make that individual feel like you're believed in and we're trying to make you successful here. And I find that most human beings are responsive in a positive way when somebody shows up that's a manager or a leader. Um, you just typically get them to kind of turn on pretty quickly and go, okay, like I'm going to go all in here. I'm going to start rowing the boat in the same direction. But that's not always, it's not 100%, right? Just kind of depends case by case. But I generally want to give people the benefit of the doubt and give them a chance to succeed.
I like that mentality.
Thank you. It's worked well. It's not easy. So it takes a lot of time sometimes. It
Of
makes the
course.
hiring process really important.
Yeah, for sure. And we can stay on that because I usually like to ask like some advice, and you gave some before about like working in sports. But if you're talking about the hiring process, if someone is there's a lot of young people listening, students that they want to get into this industry, and when they are at the interview, what's some tips that you can give for someone to give a good impression?
Yeah, I think, let's just work in the world of, somebody graduating university and moving into the workforce. Anything that you can do in advance of going out and entering the workforce from an internship perspective is extremely valuable. It really sets you up for success. Um, we have right now, we're a team of, I think, 9 full-time here at Magnolia Momentous, and we have 9, 10, 11 interns. We very much lean into our interns. We really try to get them exposed to as much as they can handle. And depending on the school schedule, be as active as possible with them. And our interns, I can say, see a lot that they typically wouldn't see. They're on a lot of calls with a lot of fascinating people, having fascinating, sophisticated conversations that just kind of shrinks the novelty over time to like, how do you show up and have a call with somebody? What's the right way to do that? How do you negotiate, right? How do you take a call and turn it into something actionable? So when you show up with some type of intern experience or lived working experience, I think you're already ahead of the curve. I think humanly, we innately want to show the best version of ourselves, um, in particular in an interview process. But I think I find people that are most genuine, that are willing to say, these are my strengths, and yes, these are my weaknesses, and being honest about those weaknesses is really critical. It builds trust. It allows, me to know, hey, where are the areas that we need to help them and work on them. And so I think it's beneficial to be as honest and transparent as possible, because ultimately, if you're not the right fit or you elaborated too much or you frame yourself maybe in a higher position than you are, that will come to the surface. It's best just to be, here's who I am today. Here are the goals that I have. This is what I want to evolve into. I think this is the environment that can help me do that. So honesty, transparency, thinking about, whoever's interviewing you, like trust being a core component of that. And when it's baked with a little bit of exposure to the market already through an internship or a role, an entry level role, I think you're really, setting yourself up to be as successful as you possibly can. Um, I think those are some of the core things that I think about that can help individuals be successful. But at the same time, how can you stand out, right? I'll give you an example that's real time at the moment. We're talking to a handful of service providers or subject matter experts and various things that we're focused on. And one in particular yesterday went out of their way to create a 53-page deck about a particular project that we have, their opinion and perspective of it. They didn't have much information to go with. They didn't care if not everything on that deck was perfect or right. What it showed me is like, holy shit, this person just built, I met them a week ago. They built a 53-page deck with little information. A lot of it actually is really unique and different than what I've seen in the past. I need to spend more time with this person. And you don't need to create a 50-page deck every time, but showing some type of, hey, I've thought about what you guys are doing, or here's how I think I could be additive and showing up in your organization, or anything that just is different than the normal hiring process that catches somebody's attention, on the management team. That is also a very strong differentiator, in my opinion. And then lastly, I know I'm long-winded a little bit, is the communication in advance of an interview. Just showing that you've done a little bit of research on the team, on the executives that are hiring you or you're going through the hiring process with. People will mention my football experience or mention that I live in Berlin. Curious how that's going, Kyle. Looking forward to the interview. Like, how's Berlin today? That's not much. They looked at LinkedIn for 30 seconds, but at least it was like part of the thought process from a preparation perspective. And that is, although not elaborate, a differentiator when you just have some of those key things that catch people's attention.
No, definitely. I couldn't agree more. And I think they're all great advice. And specifically the last one used to, doesn't take much, but like when someone is pitching for, draw something from my own experience, pitching for the podcast they want to jump on. And, they haven't done you see that this is just a copy paste that they send to 20 people. But as you said, if they just said like, yeah, hi, Marcus, I liked the previous episode with John. Um, like I'm suggesting this person, then okay, at least they have done something instead of just hi team or hi who this may concern and going along those lines. Then I lose interest pretty fast.
I have not we have somebody that was an intern that's currently getting their MBA at Stanford. They're now working with us as much as they can in their semester, and they're going to join the firm full time once they graduate. But he's going through a course right now in Stanford's MBA school about unique communication. So he told me a story this morning on an investment relations call where, he looked up somebody he was getting on a call with, ultimately to pitch to fundraise, saw that guy liked Porsche 911s, had a couple of them. And so he wrote an email like, hey, I'm still driving my minivan with my family around. I'm aspiring to someday drive a Porsche 911. I see that, you know a lot about that. Until then, I'll just talk to you and learn more about the Porsche, in our conversation. And it was like, again, like 30 seconds identifying that, but he got a response from a cold lead that could be very valuable, generally speaking. And that's something that they're studying in the Stanford MBA program is like, how do you write an email to get people to pay attention? And so to your point, yeah, I think that's seems like common sense. But we often just get into our little habits and routine as humans where we just don't, think outside the box, even just a little bit sometimes. And that I think we're all guilty of that over time, but it is a skill that you can learn and it's not hard to learn.
Of course, we have all done it, but it's today it's so much information, and people like yourself are getting hundreds and hundreds of email maybe every day. And in order to stick out and have something extra, then you need to go that extra mile and spend those extra minutes and researching something. Otherwise, you're just one in the out of the many.
Nothing, and with the advent of AI, as it relates to human capital and humans being a part of businesses. Like anything standard, anything status quo is just not going to work anymore because, organizations, whether you like it or not, are going to think of ways to be more efficient. AI obviously gives you a lot of ability to do that. And so when you are bringing real human capital into an organization, like you want the best of the best, the most unique. And so standing out today is likely more important than it's ever been. Your CV or resume is probably not going to be the thing that gets you to the next step.
Completely agree. Something else that
Cool.
is really important and that I like to end on is networking. So,
Mm.
who is someone from your network that you think would be a good guest on this show?
I think um, I think Bobby Hennebree. Bobby is his name. I'm happy to make an introduction. Bobby is, first of all, a fascinating human being, but he is the principal for John Elway's family office. He's a one-man show for Mr. Elway. John and Bobby are partners and investors with us here at Momentous Sports. He travels 200 plus days a year. He is a master networker and relationship builder. Obviously, it really helps when you're representing John Elway, a Hall of Fame American football player. But nonetheless, his work ethic, specifically as it relates to reaching out to the network, building intentional relationships, especially in the family office world, where family offices in the past have been behind the curtain and pretty, discreet and secret. You're seeing family offices as capital moves down to the next generations, the younger generations going, hey, we've got capital. There's asset classes that our generation wants to participate in. Let's be collaborative. Let's get out from behind the curtain and, go invest directly or co-invest or whatever. And I think Bobby just does a fantastic job of generating opportunities, interest, pipeline for Mr. Elway because he really focuses on networking. And that is probably, you bring up a great point to wrap here with, Marcus. Like, if somebody says, what have you learned the most in the last 3 years of being in the family office sports world? It is, you're not going to get anywhere unless you know how to build strong, intentional, organic relationships. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes energy. Um, you don't have to be the most charismatic person in the world. You don't have to have the best personality, but you've got to be active and you've got to show up and you've got to get out at events and you've got to walk up to people where there are three people talking in a room and you're kind of nervous about butting in and introducing yourself. Like I hated that at the beginning. I was like, they're already talking. Like I want to meet them though. I don't want to intrude. My mindset now is no, like go in there, introduce yourself, open up a conversation. Typically, people are looking for that in those environments. Um, and in sports, if you can't network, if you can't build relationships, you're in trouble. Unless you're the athlete or unless you're kind of a manager or a coach or something along those lines. Otherwise, people want to work with people they like. Like in our firm, we say we only work with people that we want to do life and business with together. We have a no asshole rule for partners. Like, and you only learn that about people through networking with them, building authentic relationships. However I can help you connect to Bobby, let me know. He's a fantastic moderator. He'd be incredible on this podcast. And he sits in an interesting place where he sees a lot of what's happening kind of globally in sports. And they're very active. So Bobby's my guy.
Bobby sounds amazing, so I would really
It's
appreciate
cool.
the introduction there. Kyle, thank you.
Absolutely.
Kyle, thank you so much for taking the time to join Sports Management Podcast.
An hour already?
An hour
Wow.
already.
You're a good host, Marcus. I felt like we've been here 20 minutes, so you're
I
doing
appreciate
something right.
I appreciate that. I am conscious of your time. I know you have a lot on your plate, so I was thinking 1 hour is good. But Phil, we mentioned before we can go down to a rabbit hole on many of the topics here, so we can run this back for a version 2 at some point for sure.
Let's do it. Absolutely. Appreciate you having me, man. Appreciate the work that you're doing in the space.
Thank you.
Thanks.